Chapter 3. He seemed to have a lot of pockets. Oliver woke very late the next morning, after a long, deep sleep. The only person in the room was Fagin, who was making some tea at the fire. Oliver was still half asleep, but he saw Fagin go to the door and lock it. Then he saw him take a small box out of a hiding place in the floor. He took out a beautiful watch and some jewels and looked at them. Then Fagin noticed that Oliver was awake, and he became very angry. "What did you see?" he shouted. Oliver told him. Fagin stopped being angry. He explained that he was saving the jewels because he would need them when he was old. The Artful Dodger returned with one of the other boys. His name was Charlie Bates. Fagin asked the two boys what they had. The Artful Dodger gave him 2 wallets, and Charlie Bates gave him 4 handkerchiefs. Oliver thought that the 2 boys made these things. Fagin asked Oliver if he would like to learn how to make handkerchiefs and wallets as quickly as the Artful Dodger and Charlie Bates. Charlie Bates laughed very loudly. Oliver said he would. Charlie Bates laughed even louder. After breakfast, the 2 boys and Fagin played a game. Fagin walked around the room. He pretended he was in the street. He stopped to look in shop windows. The 2 boys tried to take things from his pockets. If Fagin felt them doing it, he would shout. They played this game for a while. Then 2 older girls came into the room. Their names were Bet and Nancy. Fagin gave the boys some money, and they left with the 2 girls. Fagin asked Oliver to try and take a wallet from his coat pocket. Oliver copied what the Artful Dodger did. Fagin was very pleased. He told Oliver to always do what the Artful Dodger told him to do, and one day he would be a great man. Then he showed Oliver how to take the sewn initials out of handkerchiefs. Oliver did this for many days. The boys kept bringing more handkerchiefs. Fagin and the boys played the same game every morning when the boys returned with the wallets and handkerchiefs. Sometimes the boys came back with nothing. When that happened, Fagin was angry and would not allow them to have dinner. Oliver asked to go out with the boys, and one day, at last, Fagin agreed. There were no handkerchiefs to fix, and Fagin said Oliver could go out with the Artful Dodger and Charlie Bates. They walked along the streets, but the boys did not hurry. Oliver was surprised when he saw Charlie Bates take apples and oranges from the shops along the way and put them into his pockets. He seemed to have a lot of pockets. Oliver didn't like it, and was about to go back to Fagin when the Artful Dodger suddenly stopped and put his finger in front of his mouth. "What's wrong?" asked Oliver. "Can you see that old man at the bookshop?" asked the Artful Dodger. Oliver saw an elderly gentleman standing outside the bookshop. He was reading a book. "He'll do," said the Artful Dodger. Charlie Bates agreed, and the 2 boys began to walk toward the man. Oliver walked behind them. He didn't know what to do. Then he saw the Artful Dodger put his hand in the gentleman's pocket, take out a handkerchief, and give it to Charlie Bates. The 2 boys ran around the corner as quickly as they could. Suddenly, Oliver understood everything. He understood about the handkerchiefs in the room, the games that Fagin played with the boys, and the jewels in the box. He turned and ran. The old gentleman noticed that his handkerchief was not in his pocket. He saw Oliver running away. "Stop, thief!" he shouted and began to run after Oliver. Everyone stopped to look. Other people began to shout too. The Artful Dodger and Charlie Bates also began to shout and run after Oliver. "Stop, thief!" they shouted. Oliver ran as fast as he could, but it was not fast enough. A man caught him. The 2 boys disappeared. The old gentleman came running up. "I'm not sure that he took it," he said. It was too late. A police officer took Oliver to the judge. The judge was an irritable man who shouted at the old gentleman and also at Oliver. "What is your name?" he shouted at Oliver. Oliver couldn't speak, so a court officer told the judge his name was Tom White. The judge asked some other questions, but Oliver could not make a noise. He felt very sick. The judge said Oliver had to work hard in jail for 3 months. Before they could take him away, however, Oliver fainted, and somebody carried him out. Another gentleman came into the court and told the judge that he was the bookseller, and that he saw 2 other boys take the handkerchief. He knew that Oliver did not take it. The judge agreed and said Oliver was allowed to leave. The man who was reading outside the bookshop was Mr. Brownlow. He left the court and found Oliver lying on his back in the street, hardly able to breathe. Mr. Brownlow called a carriage and took Oliver to his own house. Oliver was sick for many days. He did not know what was happening around him. He could not speak or eat, and hardly drank. The servants in Mr. Brownlow's house looked after Oliver. One day, finally, he spoke. "Where am I?" he asked. Immediately, a woman came to his bed. She was very kind and told him he must be quiet, or he would be sick again. She told him that her name was Mrs. Bedwin, and she would look after him. A little while later, a doctor came to see Oliver. "You must be hungry," said the doctor. "No," said Oliver. "He's not hungry," said the doctor. "You must want to sleep," he said. "No," said Oliver. "Then you are not thirsty either," said the doctor. "Yes, I am," said Oliver. The doctor spoke to Mrs. Bedwin. "Give him some tea," he said, "and make sure that he is not too hot or too cold." A few days later, Oliver could sit up in bed, although he still could not walk. Mrs. Bedwin took him downstairs to her room and sat him by the fire. She gave him some food. He thought it was the best food he had ever eaten. Oliver saw a picture on the wall and could not stop looking at it. It was a picture of a pretty lady, and Oliver thought that she wanted to speak to him. When he told Mrs. Bedwin this, she moved his chair so that he could not see it. Oliver asked her who it was, but Mrs. Bedwin did not know. Then Mr. Brownlow came in to see him. "Poor boy," he said when he saw Oliver. "Have you given him some food, Mrs. Bedwin?" he asked. Mrs. Bedwin told him she had. "Did you like the food, Tom?" asked Mr. Brownlow. "Yes, I did, but my name is not Tom, it is Oliver Twist." "Why did you tell the judge your name was Tom White?" asked Mr. Brownlow. "I didn't tell him that," answered Oliver. "Are you angry with me?" he asked. No, said Mr. Brownlow. Then he exclaimed, "What's this? Mrs. Bedwin, look at this." He pointed at the picture above Oliver's head. Oliver was a copy of the lady in the picture. The head, the eyes, the nose, and the mouth were exactly the same. Oliver did not know why Mr. Brownlow was so surprised because the exclamation made him faint again. The Artful Dodger and Charley Bates made sure that the police did not catch them. Then they ran back toward Fagin's house. They were almost there when Charley Bates began to laugh. "What's funny?" asked the Artful Dodger. "It was so funny to see him run," said Charley Bates. "And we were running after him shouting, 'Stop thief!' It was very funny." The Artful Dodger did not laugh. "What will Fagin say?" he said. The two boys got to the house and went in. Fagin saw that there were only two boys. "Where's the third one?" he wondered.